Everywhere in Britain, we're told the same thing, that change is necessary, that growth is unavoidable, and that communities will be consulted.
We didn't have any notification whatsoever
to
tell us that, this was going ahead and it would be this big.
But when people talk about consultation, they're not talking about plans on paper. They're talking about being engaged, about being listened to, about understanding what's actually being built.
Absolutely haven't got a clue what a B8 category building is. That is one.
Because when the language becomes technical and the decisions feel remote, the process stops feeling democratic.
So we really felt duped by all this.
Across the country, people describe the same experience. Plans that change, proposals that grow, and a sense that the real decisions happen somewhere else.
That doesn't have balance to the community.
Consultation in theory is meant to create a balance between development and disruption, between national ambition and local life.
I think with that consultation, it's just bare minimum.
But when consultation constitutes the bare minimum requirement, trust becomes the first casualty.
The financial impact, the mental impact, all of that, they've caused a lot of upset for a lot of people, and for what? Just to make more money.
This is the consultation gap, the space between being informed and being heard. And in Wigan, that gap now stands 60 feet high. I'm Oliver Deed. I work in community engagement, the business of listening, explaining, and helping people shape the places they live in. In this series, I'm travelling across the country to places where that process has broken down. Not to take sides, not to point fingers, but to ask a simple question. When communities resist change, is it because they hate development or because they were never truly heard?
Welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining this webinar on the Grounds for Resistance documentary that we've put together and published the amazing first episode, which I'm hoping everybody has watched before coming onto the call. My name's Oliver Deed. I'm the co-founder of ECF, and we are the company behind the documentary, and we're using this documentary series as one of the ways to highlight our ethos and philosophy around how community engagement, particularly in the built environment, should work. So I'll get a little bit more into what the Grounds for Resistance series is all about. But before I do that, we've got a superb panel of people that have joined us to get involved. And I'm going to get them each to introduce themselves because I'm incredibly lazy and I'm not going to read from the sheet. So who should I put on the spot first? Hannah, you're unmuted. Who are you?
Who am I? Oh, it's a good question, Ollie. I am Hannah Smart. I'm co-founder and director of Edge Urban Design. We're urban designers and master planners. And I'm also the chair of the Urban Design Group, which is essentially a charity that promotes all good things urban design related.
Fabulous. Thank you, Hannah. Ben?
Hi there. So my name is Ben. So I'm a self-prescribed participatory change leader. So what that means is I work across two sectors primarily. So firstly, democratic innovation, things like citizens' assemblies, as a facilitator, as a process designer, and also working with organisations to, improve collaboration and ultimately bringing those two threads together. It's about how people can make better decisions together, better really.
Well done, Ben. Nice one. Thank you very much. Liane.
Hello, everyone. My name's Liane Hartley. I am founder and director of MEND, which is a practice that seeks to get better outcomes for people from the built and lived environment. I'm a writer and advisor on the social future of cities. And I suppose I'm a little bit of an activist. So I use that word lightly to describe the work I do that's unpaid, which is about how we engage the non-experts in shaping the future of our cities. And to that end, I'm founder of Urbanistas and also Planning in the Pub, which does what it says on the tin. And latterly, Considerate Urbanism, which is an initiative to help create a kinder form of urbanism for all of us. So that's me.
mildly intimidated by the prowess of the panel, as per usual, assembled assortment of great people who've got some good perspectives on this particular topic. So I'm going to bring in somebody who is really, he'll be modest about this, but is really the driving force behind the Grounds for Resistance documentary series. I never know how to introduce him. With ECF, he is our visual communications lead and doing an amazing job, but he's got many, many different other hats that I'm not going to allow him to talk about because he only ever works for us. But he's been the sort of like intellectual brains behind this, and really the reason that we got to such a beautiful episode is because of all the work that he put in. So Lawrence, introduce yourself. Again, I'll ask you the question, who are you? But also just give us a little bit of a flavour of what Grounds for Resistance is all about.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Lawrence Farncliffe, and thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I'm the visual communications lead at ECF, and I'm proud about that. And I'm proud to say that because my background is in documentary filmmaking, and it seemed to be a natural home for this part of my career to be with somebody that I feel, a company that I feel like I and what I do has a real synergy and connection. Documentary is a really, really good way of finding out about people's stories and connecting with people. And as far as I'm concerned, ECF are the best at doing that with the communities and stakeholders that they work with. So it made complete sense for us to work together and develop this use storytelling and use the documentary genre to explore what ECF does and is about and what matters to them. So that's that.
And despite the fact I put you on the spot, Lawrence, that was beautifully done. So thank you very much. So the first episode, hopefully everybody's watched it. I'm going to show a quick 2-minute clip in a second, just before we get into the discussion. But Lawrence and I travelled up in November to the outskirts of Wigan, to a place called Astley. We'd come across this campaign group that had been sort of furiously campaigning around a warehouse development that had been built right behind a residential estate, and we really wanted to get to the bottom. We wanted to get beyond the headlines and really get to the bottom of why there was frankly an engagement and a communications failure. And we put together this. We went and spent 2 days, and we spoke to lots of incredibly interesting people, including councillors and residents and various other groups. And what we've got is 25 minutes of amazing content, which really seeks to explain what happened, get beyond the headlines, but also look at this really with an engagement lens. So
shoes off, shoes on. What are we saying? Okay. Are you Steve by any chance? Hi Steve, I'm Ollie. Nice to meet you. How's your day been? All right? Oh bloody hell, yeah. Oh dear. Yeah. It's quite a.
All day is one way, is it?
So when did you first realise what was going on here?
Well, we've lived here best part of 49 years. We moved here when they first built, and it was farmers' fields. I knew the farmer. The early plans for it was completely different to what it is now. Completely different, acceptably different. And they were low level, they were nicely designed, bring jobs to the area, fine, all that type of thing, you know, and there was no issues. What basically happened was the planning permission that was granted initially, they allowed to lapse. It was all sharp practice on behalf of these people. There's no two ways about that. They know their game, they know the way to achieve what the goals are. The problem is with developers, as anybody with a brain knows, developers will build whatever they can, wherever they can. That's fine. That's what their line of work and business is. It's up to people and bodies like your planning departments to be mature and sensible and intelligent about it and say, no, you can't. You know, they are the gatekeepers. They keep them within reasonableness. That is not reasonable. That is not reasonable in anybody's book. The sting in the tail is to then give that and the other buildings are 24/7 operating license. You're never going to be able to get to sleep. It's absolutely absurd, absolutely absurd.
Steve was the star of the show, and Lawrence and I are consistently texting each other whenever we see Steve on TV somewhere, because we absolutely loved him. And what I should say just before I bring in our panelists is we did try and speak to PLP, who were the developer behind this particular application, and Wigan Borough Council, to give them an opportunity to put their side of the story to us, which they didn't take up, sadly. So we tried in our explanation throughout the course of the video to give a very honest account of what happened, and to do that from a neutral perspective. So let's get into the discussion. I'm going to ask our three panelists really to reflect on. I'm hoping that they watched it, by the way, but I'm going to get them each to reflect on what they've seen, and just give us a bit of a view on what they think went wrong, how this could have been addressed. And is there a way that engagement could have sort of dealt with this before it became a problem? I'm going to put on the spot first, Hannah. I'm throwing to you in the first instance. Give us your reflections.
Ollie. I have to say, when I watched it again this morning, Ollie, I just immediately thought, why isn't Ollie on TV? Like, I feel like there should be some kind of BBC Two series or something. I don't know, Ollie does planning or something like that. Ollie does engagement around the UK. That was my first reflection. And also, I think I really found myself struggling to separate the difference between what went wrong here and what goes wrong in our industry. So I think I have a tendency to revert to the big picture of what goes wrong in our industry, but I will stick to your questions first. And I think a phrase you used in the film was that there's a consultation gap. And again, my very first instinct, I know we're talking about consultation and engagement, but it's a consultation gap, and it's a communication gap, for me, which is the first problem that went wrong. There's a trust gap, and then I guess I come from a design point of view, so there's a design gap. They were my kind of three big points that I wanted to kind of pick up on within your kind of what went wrong here. So perhaps going through, if I could touch on all of those, and maybe that's a nice way to start, and then the other guys can chip in. So consultation gap, yes, but number one, communication gap. In general, we are so bad at talking to each other. We're so bad at advocating. Our industry is awful at communicating in a very simple way. The UK average reading and speaking age is actually 12 years old. That's like, this is not a fact I've made up, that's an actual fact that somebody from Parkinson's UK told me yesterday. So we're not explaining things and communicating in the way that a 12-year-old person would communicate. So I think, simplifying jargon, because I can imagine in this instance there was a lot of jargon that was used in the small consultation process that took part, and that's a really big problem. Sarah Terry Farrell always used to say to us, if you can't explain it to your grandma or to a child, then don't bother communicating, which has always stuck with me. So I imagine in this instance was a big problem. Trust is another one, which is an industry-wide issue. There is no trust for development or developers, and that definitely came across in the film. I think there is always, rightly or wrongly, everyone's initial instinct, and it was here with the people that you spoke to, that development is bad, development is wrong, we can't trust them, they don't do what they say they're going to do, their designs will always be different from the ones that are actually built. So that's a really big issue for us. And then design, I mean, my first instinct was, did anyone actually stand in, was it Steve? Did anyone stand in Steve's garden and think about what it would look like, firstly, to see that? But most importantly, and this is the bit that our whole industry is missing, what does it feel like to be there? How will Steve and his partner feel to see that at the end of their garden? And what impact does that have on their experience of where they live and what home means? Because I personally think it's completely changed for them. So as an industry, we're not coming from a point of view of how places feel, and we're completely missing the human aspect of that. And that kind of relates back to consultation. So I'm sorry, I haven't exactly answered your question. I've done the politician thing of going for bigger picture, but I think that's where our problems lie, and they're things that we see over and over again. Like, I doubt very much, and I haven't looked at the application, but I doubt that anybody drew a section from through Steve's house, through the proposed site and out the other side, because I would imagine that that design was very much kind of thought about only to the red line boundary. And again, that looks to me from what's built that that's the problem on the ground. And, you know, we really need to think outside of that. And that is about consultation. That's thinking about communities and places and people's feelings rather than just putting a building from space anywhere. I also imagine it's probably a generic design that's been built elsewhere. And that's why everyone you spoke to was reflecting on the fact that everything had changed and it wasn't what was proposed at the time, and they couldn't relate to it. So I'm going to throw those in to start with. And then let Liane and Ben add to it and see where we end up, if that's okay. They're my kind of starter for 10s.
That is a really good start for 10. Thank you very much, Hannah. I'm gonna stay industry wide and go and segue this to Liane. Liane, give us your reflections. And I'm also going to try and spotlight you. So Hannah, don't take this personally, but I just forgot to do that. So let's see if this works.
God, what does that mean?
There you go. You're now bigger on the screen.
God, okay. Not something I'm used to, being 4'11". I couldn't agree more with what Hannah's just said. I thought that was a really lovely framing of what the issues are. And thank you to Ollie and Lawrence for such a stunning piece of work. It really was incredibly powerful to watch. And also heartbreaking. I've seen it a couple of times now, and you know, the first time I was quite astounded, and not in a good way. And then the second time I looked at it, the emotions really did kind of settle and had processed since. And that word emotion is really the nub of it for me. Effectively, what we have today is a planning system that seeks a spatial answer, and it forgets that actually it also needs a social one. And it never fails to amaze me that a process that we have to effectively shape our lived environments feels so unhuman. It's a system that is just not cognizant or capable of being cognizant of the human and relational environment it's operating in, and the relationships that are built on in that place. And I thought that was really brought to bear in the film. And as Hannah's just said, you know, no one in that process could have put themselves in Steve's shoes and really appreciated the full scale and impact of having that building or set of buildings or that spatial configuration on their doorstep. It is overwhelming. And for me, my interest is really in the experience of what it's like to go through the planning process. From various different perspectives. You know, I am a planner. I joined planning 26 years ago, and I remember learning in my training as a planner, it was very much about the what and the how. What I felt was missing was the why. And you can't watch that film, or I can imagine if I was you, Oliver and Lawrence, stood in that space, being absolutely bombarded with the big question: why, how, and why was this allowed? And unfortunately, it's because I think we need a wholesale behavioural change, a behavioural turn in the built environment, the behavioural turn that has been long advocated for by many, many, many voices over decades and decades. I mean, I can list the names here, and you won't be surprised to hear what they are. But they hail from the 50s and the 60s. We need to remember that the built environment is also a lived environment. But what we've seen here is a complete disconnect from the two. And I think that's because over, you know, probably the same amount of time, planning has tried to change with the prevailing cultural changes that have been thrown at it. You know, it needed to house millions of people from the post-war. It needed to be an engine of growth in the 80s. And it really has an identity crisis. And we're grappling with that now. What is planning for? And who is it for? Because it doesn't seem to be working for anyone. And, you know, we didn't hear from the planning department, but, you know, I don't want to speak for them, but I'm sure there were pressures on them as well to deliver the spatial answer that planners expected to serve up. But it has consequences, and it has consequences that are felt by people from here on in on their everyday lives, because those are the people that have to live with the planning decisions that are made. And you won't be surprised to hear me say what I'm about to say next, which is, I think as part of that behavioural turn and that fundamental cultural shift in what planning is and who it's for, we need to start seeing the community as the client. The community is not a bystander or recipient of development. It's the ultimate custodian of that development once it's been left behind. And until we start respecting the community as more of a client, and respect goes on both sides, by the way, so it's not about us and them, but until we start shifting off the fundamentals of planning towards what it needs to mean today, in 2026 in the world we're living in, I'm afraid you could probably make 1 million of these documentaries for the next 10 years.
That feels like you're throwing down the gauntlet there, Liane, with that last one. So, but thank you so much. Really, yeah, the community as a client is a very interesting concept that I think we should explore momentarily. Okay, Ben, you're not built environment, you're not planning. A bit more than that. So it's a really interesting perspective. So you have the floor. What's your perspective?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks so much. And I mean, the kind of interesting thing about the role that I play is working across multiple sectors, and often the language is about, you know, this specific challenge that this sector has or this case has, and the patterns are there every time in every different sector. And I mean, this video is like a really clear illustration. And I think one of the points that Hannah raised, which I really want to focus on, is that trust, or like lack thereof. And that was so obvious throughout every stage of that video. And I mean, the key thing really from my side is that that trust or that lack of trust is from both sides. So in the video itself, it's quite clear from the residents to the councils, you know, talking about they're doing the bare minimum, you know, things are being forced through, it's just not good enough, you know, and the fact that their only kind of outlet to challenge that trust is through legal attempts to stop it. And then similarly from the council to the residents, we obviously didn't get to hear from the council side of things. But as Liane referred to before, there's a kind of a lack of trust in the way that the process was designed in the first place, you know, and my assumption from being around these types of processes in a whole range of different sectors is this view of residents as blockers of change, or blockers of development, you know, slowing down growth. And I found it really interesting. I did watch right to the end, and like the very last slide when there was a talk about the council, like the legal action that they're taking. I saw the word legal action, I squinted a little bit, and it was about challenging the residents over some like defamatory like social media posts, you know, and that's kind of like a real kind of indictment of that they're doing that primarily to save face, you know, because it's certainly not a trust building exercise, you know, that cat is well and truly out the bag. So it's almost like trying to claw back any kind of semblance of face that they might have as well. And I suppose it's interesting from my side as well about the role of the company and the developer. And I think what kind of comes across is this whole idea in that case, the trust isn't assumed. You know, there's an understanding of like the profit side of things. So I suppose building further forward with the role of the developer, yeah, I kind of understand that role of the partnership and that role in the collaboration as a stakeholder. But ultimately, is thinking about where trust is expected, where it's not expected, and trust is not like an infinite thing that can kind of be distributed here, there, and everywhere. But it's about defining where it where it goes out and where it should be reciprocated. And certainly that resident to council relationship is the most obvious example of that. And again, I think what that shows up in reality, which I've alluded to somewhat already, is that the actions that were taken, both from the resident side and the council side, were from the combative end. You know, set up an action group, you know, putting forward a stop notice, a legal challenge. And I think that's really an indictment of the kind of paternalistic system that we set up, where it's just like the demand is this, you know, your way to response is kind of refusal, where, you know, any good participation or any kind of good relationship is about providing multiple options for people to engage, to be listened to kind of share their opinion. And I think often what's missing in these conversations is there's a huge middle ground of shared interests. And the assumption is, and even one of the questions that was put forward in the video itself about, do residents resist change because they hate development or they're never truly heard? And I think I obviously lean towards the never truly heard side of things. But I think, again, it isn't, that binary isn't there, and a lot of the council's perspective, the developer's perspective is that they're either for or against, and that can be fed up all the way to the way our kind of democratic system operates. I'm either for or against something. And there's a huge missing middle ground of shared interest where the people want the best for their community, the jobs that they're provided, something that might look nice that they can engage with, and they understand the trade-offs, but they're not given an opportunity to share that. And just one final point, I think, as well, particularly from a practitioner side of things, it's very clear that we can put the case forward for the sake of the community that, we need to increase trust, we need to listen more. It's obvious that the benefits there, but I think what's often missing from that is from the council side, like genuinely how it benefits them to have increased trust, to avoid having to iterate, avoid having to spend thousands, hundreds and thousands on these legal challenges, both from a time and an expense perspective as well. So it's not about doing it because it's all nice and fluffy and everyone feels heard and trusted. It's effective as well, and I think that's often was something that's very much missing from these discussions, and certainly this video is a stark example of that.
Brilliant, Ben. Thank you very much. I'm gonna throw out a question. I'm gonna stop spotlighting you, and I'm gonna throw out an initial question, which is not what was on the run sheet. So apologies. I'm just going to change it up slightly. In this case, is there an alternative perspective, which is this is just the price of progress? We need economic growth within the country. There's a lot of talk around data centers, which are not too dissimilar in, their scale to what we saw in Wigan. Is there an argument that this is just the price of progress, and there are going to be some people that lose out, and that's just tough? They need to get on with it. I'd be interested in people's perspectives on that. I might go to you first, Liane, because I suspect you've got quite a strong view on that.
I mean, where do you stop with that approach? I mean, you could argue anything with that piece of logic. I fundamentally disagree, and I think there's plenty of opportunities to understand how the planning system can enable and influence future growth. That wasn't what was happening here. People were on the sharp end of some quite fundamental failures in process. And to suggest that simply in the name of progress, you can set all of that aside, that process aside, is to me a real, I think is a dangerous position to take, because you can then use that in very nefarious ways. I think the real issue here is, how do we find the best way to have a conversation between multiple stakeholders and what the future of the place should be, and that to me is about, how do you facilitate multiple perspectives towards what Ben was saying, towards common ground, shared interests, and what the overall goal is. And I just don't think we are capable of doing that. I think we really struggle. I think, on a national level, we don't have a plan for this country and where we want to be next, and how we're going to get there. And I think we're seeing the sharp end of that on a micro level in our communities, where we fail to even understand the basics of how or not an appropriate this kind of development is in a residential area. That to me says it all.
Interesting. It's amazing how the micro can reflect the macro in that sense as what's going on at that national scale. Hannah.
Yeah,
I reckon you're going to agree. I reckon you're going to agree.
I would never disagree with Liane. Not a chance. No, I do agree. I think it's interesting, Liane, you called yourself, what's the word, activist? Was that the word you used, I think? And it takes activists and it takes advocates, of which I think all of us are those, to create that change. Your question, Ollie, reminded me of a point that we had yesterday on an urban design group webinar, which was Make Space for Girls. So they were suggesting just adding the word gender into MPPF policy, how that could create belonging. And it's kind of given me the same feeling, because if we don't try to create change, just by adding one small word, for example, into policy, then nothing will ever happen. And the point that really reminded me of what you asked was, they were saying, it's okay if we forget that we've only been designing, or realize we've only been designing for teenage boys in play areas. I know this is off subject, but it's the same kind of feeling. If it's okay to realize we've been doing that, and actually kind of put a full stop in time and say, okay, we were doing it wrong, but actually now we can change. So how do we move forward? And it's exactly the same point, I think. There's no way we're going to sit still, especially the people on this call, and accept that that's the way things should be. It's any of us have the power to create change, if we want to, and if we collaborate and work together. So that's what we're fighting for, I'm sure. So I can't disagree with Liane.
And
if I could
go on, Liane, please.
Jump in again. I think it's also about sort of how we perceive, how we view our built environment in terms of it being an object that is just there to serve certain needs. These are the environments in which we live out our everyday lives, and when we reduce them to simple objects that can just be commoditized and then wrapped in this kind of utility speak, it really completely flattens just how important they are psychologically, emotionally, in so many other intangible ways. But those intangibles are actually fundamental to how we live, and how we live well. And when we make decisions on other people's places, let's remember these are other people's places, not ours, that only see them from that perspective, then you're actually causing harm to people. I don't say this lightly. It can be traumatizing, and we heard elements of that in the interview, and I sorry, I forget his name, where one of the interviewees told the story about just how profoundly challenging it had been to one of his neighbours' mental health and emotions. These aren't trivial things. These decisions make real life impacts on people that last way longer than a planning commission.
I think that was reflected, I think, in every single conversation that we had. And actually, the first conversation that we had, we went into the back garden of a lady who was she was very nervous, so I'm gonna leave her nameless. She parent of a young family, and literally we went to the back garden, and you just presented with this sort of sheer wall in front of you, it was just, and the impact that's had on their lives has just been quite incredible. So Ben, I'm going to hand over to you. Should we just ignore these people and get on with growth, or is there a better way?
Well, Ollie, I'm once again going to push back on that binary framing. So it's never an either or with these things, and there's a massive middle ground within it. I mean, I think the key thing is when we're talking about pushing economic growth, the key thing is who for. In the first instance, kind of to Liane's point that these aren't just kind of blankets of land that people are putting it, they're communities, there's people's livelihoods, but also I think there's a kind of fundamental aspect of buy-in as well. So the government can have grand plans about we're going to create investment, we're going to drive growth, etc. But if a lot of those plans are constantly facing pushback, then there's not going to have that opportunity. And there's all of this talk, even from an outsider perspective. I know the slow, laborious British planning process, and a lot of the negative press that it has. And again, my diagnosis of that is that is people don't feel part of it. So if they don't feel part of the conversation, then the only kind of avenue to react to something is opposition, and to kind of use those avenues as much as possible as well. And I think, you know, we'll hopefully get the opportunity to touch in more about what are possible opportunities to develop that as well. But I think the key thing is that people support what they help create. You know, if people feel part, if they feel heard, then, you know, whatever the proposal is, and ultimately people are going to be in support of something which is bringing wealth, bringing income, bringing jobs, bringing development to the area, but just not at this, not of sacrificing all of the other aspects linked to livelihood that Liane had pointed out.
I think that's let's develop that a little bit. And I think with the question that I've got is, if you let's say this hasn't happened, you've got this site, PLP own this site, they want to do something with it. Is there a scenario in which, you know, how can we get a better outcome here? You know, is there a way that we can reconcile the, you know, the obvious difficulties of like developing on a site like this so close to a residential neighborhood with the desire of the developer to, you know, extract value from this particular site? And are there potentially deliberative ways so if you're going to design this engagement again, and I'll go to you in the first instance, Ben, like what would it look like? How could this have been done differently?
Yeah, I think just as a starting point as well, I mean, clearly in this case you talked about the consultation gap, and, you know, the consultation, you know, was not up to standard and not appropriate. But I think it's important to really recognize the difference between consultation, deliberation, and more deeper aspects. You know, consultation is effectively, here's our plan, tell us what you think, and, you know, you create those avenues of the communication. Whereas the deliberation side of thing is, here's the question, you know, here's the problem, here's what we're trying to wrestle with, help us work out the answer. And I think just using that as a starting point does open so much more possibilities, both in terms of the creativity which people can provide from having a different perspective, let alone the kind of engagement and buy-in that people are kind of looking towards as well. So if you are designing deliberation, you know, some of the key aspects of it, so you would use a process called sortition, which is effectively a lottery selection. And the key aspect of that is that it's not just your usual suspects. You know, you're not opening a town hall where the only people really turning up a town hall are people with vested interest. But ultimately, if the conversation's starting at a point of two vested interests, you're not really going to have that deep, nuanced discussion. So bringing people to the table who, you know, match the diversity of the population within an area, both in terms of the way they think, their own expertise, and also from a demographic perspective as well. The other aspect, and this is kind of something that can be built into kind of consultation more broadly, is how information is put forward and communication. I mean, again, don't know this, but I imagine that these plans are pretty boring, many pages, you know, not set out for everybody to understand. But if you're starting from a deliberative perspective, you know, that plays a key role in actually translating what that plan is as to something people can understand. And even small features like at the front of the document, you have a, you know, like too long don't read of, this is the issue, this is the sticky bit, this is what we can promise, you know. And something as straightforward as that as the front page, okay, fine, I get what we're working with is, without having to, you know, get your glossary out and all of this kind of stuff. And also when we're talking about the setup of these deliberative roles, is using expertise, and the expertise is broad in this case. Everyone has a degree of expertise, but it's a way to engage the developer. You know, imagine if we had some sort of like binding. So if you're developing an area over a certain amount of money, you have to have someone that has to speak directly and, you know, be questioned, be quizzed to the you know, the panel or the citizens, to really kind of pick out that nuance. What are you trying to achieve here? You know, people aren't stupid, they can understand that. And I think that creates binding from the outset. And I think just one kind of final point on this, I think with it designing this, the key thing is to bear in mind this has to be an infrastructure. We can't rely on, like, you know, let's say Wigan Council have learnt their lessons and they've, you know, are going to become good actors and like take this on board. We can't just rely on good actors to do this, you know, good practitioners. You know, there needs to be kind of demand to actually how we can kind of embed this structurally as well. Because otherwise it just becomes a default in low stakes situations that everyone's happy. You know, someone that's put their job on the line because they want to trial this initiative, they do it in areas where there's not going to be pushback as well. And where these deliberative aspects should be used, they shouldn't be used in every case. You know, I think that would undermine it to the setup and the establishment of actually the building the structures of the system correctly. If every time we have to, you know, go through that whole process, there should be some sort of trigger. So in these instances where it is reaching a threshold of disengagement, of complaints or whatever, okay, now we're going to trigger that deliberative method. And I think that's about that building that wider architecture, so it's not just a one-off design. And again, you know, in an ideal world, these would be reliant on national strategies, which are also deliberative, which already have that buy-in, which can set these parameters, you know, regional town plans, which are also deliberative and have that buy-in. And then, so therefore, in kind of severe cases, such as the one in the video, there's aspects that are triggered, and then you have that deliberative to solve these specific issues. So it's that wider infrastructure is the kind of the key design point, as well as the specific instances around it.
I knew that would get you going. If you ever want to get Ben going in the pub, just say, "Tell us about deliberation," and he'll get going. Liane, I'll bring you in, and then Hannah, I'll bring you in, and then I'll open up to the floor. So, Liane, how can you have done this better?
Sure, I completely agree with what Ben's saying, and it really speaks to me of something that I've been thinking about in terms of how we sort of consider planning as being really this kind of physical process that has social outcomes. And we've seen, unfortunately, the kind of social outcomes that came from the experience in the film. But what if we flip that around and actually we saw planning as more of a social process? So actually, instead of the urban thing, that spatial answer that it's looking for to come up with that kind of plan or the specifications, actually planning then becomes about holding space for the relationships that need to be built and the collective decision making that needs to happen, and the exchanges, you know, between members of the community who are experts on their own places. They know more about it than we do, bringing that knowledge, bringing the intention that they want for that place. So then planning becomes the holder of that space and the holder of that process. And I'm reminded of where Jane Jacobs, when she talks about building, she sees them as an event. And by that, she means all the different people and time and decisions and connection and exchange that had to go in to make that object a reality. I'm starting to see planning in the same way. It's almost like a movement. And in any kind of movement, you know, its shape and quality and texture changes over time. But I feel that the kind of, when we see planning as just about this physical object, it doesn't have that flex, it doesn't have that capacity to morph as the need for that movement, the relationships that are made in that movement, and the getting from the problem to the solution naturally demands. And I know that's me talking in very lofty terms, but I'm that's what I'm thinking about at the moment. And if that's how we need planning to be, then what do we need to do in order to make that happen? And it's the work that Ben does. It's that deliberative work, and it's messy and it's awkward and it's difficult, and it's not perfect, and it's sometimes the solution that you come to is not perfect, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't go through that process together. That's what being human is, you know. It's messy experience.
Superb. Oh, you're sounding quiet. I've just muted you there, Liane, because you sounded quite loud. I don't know what you sounded like. You're in a hairdryer a bit there, but we're all good. That I feel like the hairdryer is the start of the movement. So you know, I love the links between both of those interventions. Tie it off for us, Hannah.
Well, at least we're getting things moving, aren't we? So that's the hairdryer is a great segue. I wanted to pick up on Ben's word of trust. I don't know if anyone saw that I've just popped into the chat. The definition of trust. Trust is the confident, voluntary choice to rely on someone's character, ability, or truth. It is the foundation of human connection, allowing us to be vulnerable, which I think we're definitely missing, despite uncertainty. Ultimately, trust is not merely a feeling, it is an action built through consistent behaviour and proven reliability over time. And obviously, as we all know, trust is very easily lost. I think coming from the point of view of thinking about developers or those that engage in the built environment who look to engage and work with communities, I genuinely think one of the biggest problems is fear. I think it's human fear of what might happen, because, you know, thinking about those people doing their jobs and what they have to face every day, you know, I think many developers will see proper engagement and consultation as something that brings them problems, something that brings them difficulties. Emotionally, it's difficult because you're dealing with people and their kind of vulnerabilities and emotions that, you know, that they're really feeling, and perhaps we don't know what to do with that. So that is a real problem. I think, again, picking up on something else Ben said, Ben, I've quoted you here on my post-it note about consultation and deliberation, and I was thinking that's great, but if you think about it in terms of say, for example, a health condition, that's the diagnosis, and the bit that we're not achieving is the healing. And I don't think the solutions that end up on the ground are the healing either. So we're missing that human bit that fits in there somewhere, that's based on trust and isn't based on fear, and it allows people to be vulnerable. And I quickly got up to get a prop, because the Urban Design Group, I don't know if you can see this or it might be fuzzy, we created a report about growing and sustaining communities. That's based on new settlements, but I thought perhaps a wonderful outcome from this conversation is, I mean, I know because I wrote what's in there, the bit that's missing there is actually how you properly engage communities, and you know, for us to kind of use our hairdryer to start the process, you know, we could actually start to create a movement that shows what best practice is. So that's where I wanted to kind of get us to, Ollie, that point.
Thanks, Anna, brilliant. And Demos have done a really interesting piece of work on that engagement piece around new settlements. So after this, I'll share the link on that, because they've done they're starting to do some really interesting thinking, particularly on new settlements, but I think it's got applicability across what we're talking about here today and many other things. So I will open up to the floor. I must confess, this is the first time I've done a Teams webinar, so I'm not actually sure what participants can do, whether they can actually put their hands up or whether they have to go into the chat. Liam McNaught, can you put your hand up? And if you can't, okay, right, Liam, I'm putting you on the spot to ask a question then in that case. So I'm just going to allow the mic, so you can now unmute yourself. Oh, this is control. I think he can unmute himself. Maybe not. He's now going to be really struggling. Worried. Oh, you don't have mic or camera access. Okay, that's interesting. Next time we're doing this on Zoom, because it's much better. So if anybody's got questions, they can pop them into the chat, because we've got about 12 more minutes. I'm sure Rion must have a question. He's always got questions. So, but if not, I think I'm going to. I will indulge Chair's privilege unless I get something in the next.
You've got one in there. Question.
Have I? Oh, Ashley,
yeah,
sorry.
In there already.
Okay, right, okay. And a brilliant question. When a project has been built and has a lasting negative impact on a place, are there any meaningful approaches we can take to engage with communities and reduce that impact over time? What might those be? That is a brilliant question, I have to say. I don't know who wants to. So the negative impact has already happened. Is there something that we can do to reduce that?
I've got a quick one-liner. A really lovely phrase I heard recently was, when the guards move out, the guardians move in. And the guards being the developers and the guardians being the community. So I guess for me, that would be, you know, is there a strategy for a community kind of empowerment where they can take that project over? You know, things don't have to always stay the same. You know, if you get power behind something, they can change. That's my quick one-liner.
I mean, actually, the slight irony of all of this is that, and I'm sure Lawrence would attest to this, when we went there to this location, there is a stronger sense of community here than in many locations that I've been to across the country. And the residential estate is quite a new estate, but what's happened has really brought people together. And yes, it's been around the sort of negative and a campaign against the developer, but you know, I was amazed at how people got along. And the local councillor who we talked to, James Bird, he was amazing. He just took us around the community, but you know, he did a great job. And he's really bringing them together. I'll see if I can get maybe Rion can navigate this mic system. So I'm now allowing you to speak, Rion, but I don't know if you can unmute. There's probably some way of doing it, but I'm just hopeless, and therefore not able to do it. Pop your question in the chat, Rion, if you can. Liane, I'm going to hand over to you. So what else can we do? Where there's been a negative impact that's happened within a community, are there things that we can do to really sort of address those issues?
Yeah, I think so. And it touches on what Hannah was saying. It's that healing part, isn't it? And I think a phrase I always use is places abhor a social vacuum. Even in the most stark, inhospitable places, there can be signs of social life. Because places are inherently about people. And I think it's how you are able to come together and build those connections despite that negativity. And often creatives and artists and children are really good at facilitating that healing and those connections. So for me, it's about what can you do to sort of setting aside again the focus on the physical, and what can you do to help build those connections and relationships locally in and around what's happened. That said, I also think that the resistance and the harm and the mistrust that's built from that negative impacts is fertile. So, you know, far from saying resistance is futile, I think it is actually fertile. And actually, once you've lost that trust and you've almost enabled that resistance, it can grow, and it can then be used as great resource for the next challenge. So I think it's really important to learn those lessons from that negative impact and try to understand, well, what would the community, what would those local relationships need in order to not for that resistance, that negativity to fester for next time, because it's unfortunate that that is what happens. And I also think that also communities can be incredibly resilient and capable of moving forward despite what has happened. And we've seen that in aspects or examples where, you know, the modernism, the modernist house building project, which did lead to large swathes of communities having to be swept away and moved elsewhere. Those communities were able to form new communities after that. And so it does speak to the energy and importance of connection, even in the face of sort of negative impact.
Really, really interesting. One of the things that we didn't do, Liane, to really test that theory is look at the local election results and what happened, because it would have been interesting to see if there's a correlation between how the politics has turned out there because of that disenfranchisement that, as you say, becomes like really, really fertile. Rion, it looks like you might have worked out your mic, I think. Are you there? He's not. Oh, yes, he is. Hang on. Rion, we can hear you. Fire away.
Well, I'm delighted to join you belatedly. Please fire Eventbrite. I lost 25 minutes trying to get through to this. It told me I had a ticket and then asked me to register 4 times. So apologies. So I didn't hear the beginning of this. Neither can I get the chat to work. But listen, wonderful debate, and a good debate, important debate. Obviously, I would have views as to how people interpret consultation, because I believe we regard it as far too restrictive a concept. But leave that aside. What struck me about what I heard was that I didn't hear much until the last few minutes about local councillors and councils. Because at the end of the day, much as we may hate the system, that is where planning authorities actually operate. And my suspicion is that for the last 15, 20 years, we've done a piss poor job, excuse my Welsh, at educating the elected member base as to what good practice is and isn't. And somebody mentioned, I think it was Ben, obviously we all welcome the kind of deliberation that starts early enough that you can sit down with communities, whether you use sortation or not is another matter, starts early enough to say, what do we envisage as the future of this chunk of England's green and pleasant land? Now, unfortunately, the way the system works at the moment, the communities are only engaged when there is a proposal of some kind or another. And by then, you are doing the classic consultation. Here's our proposal. What do you think about it? Now, there's a big flaw in all of that. Those consultations are as often as not run by the very people whose proposal it is, and who therefore have the most obvious vested interest in having the answer yes. I mean, in the ideal world, consultation should be run by a neutral body, not by the people who are, by virtue of their business model, only there to get a yes answer. Now, that's a much more fundamental issue. So just to throw a pebble into the pond, those are the sort of ideas that spring to my mind in the half of your events that I've managed to follow.
Well, thanks, Rion. I'm gonna mute you now, but that was because I'm going to tie the thread between that and what Mark's put into the chat, which is particularly on his second point about advocating for holding continuous conversation with the community rather than set piece consultations, a consultation and not a consultation mantra, which is something that he's got experience of around Lincolnshire reservoirs. So I think there's a few threads that are tying together here. Typically, we're coming right to the end of this, so I'm gonna invite final two sentence contribution from our panelists who have been absolutely fantastic. What's the lasting message on this that you'd want this group of people that are here today to take away from this particular session? So Ben, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I was going to respond to the initial point, I suppose, to link to that and to round it all off, is the thinking about when kind of proposing consultation or deliberation or what it may be, is actually that stating explicitly what is open and what isn't. Because if you're starting from a blank sheet open point and expecting people to engage with a whole document rather than the actual issues, it really kind of shuts down those issues. And then probably a snappier one-liner will people support what they help create.
Bravo. That was more than two sentences, but I'll let you off. Hannah.
I think my one or two sentences would be that we really need to remember that we are human and we're missing out on human-to-human interaction, and that's where the problem lies. I think at the moment, consultation and engagement is business to human, so we've got it the wrong way around.
Thank you very much. Amen to that. Liane.
Yeah, I think ultimately for me it's about being careful with other people's places. We need to recognise that a conversation about place is a conversation with everyone, not for everybody. And echo what Rian was saying, Prananda, Rian, that we have created a system of roles, and then it's really hard to move around those roles. It's like we're on a checkerboard and we can only go in certain directions. So for me, it's going back to the idea that planning the process should be more of a movement and enabler of relationships.
Fantastic. I have to say, what a stellar panel of people to bring together with really good insights there. We've recorded this now, start of a movement, I think. So virtual, yeah, bravo, Liam. Yeah, good virtual clap for the panel who have been fantastic. Thank you to everybody that's popped along. I'm going to just say, if you want to watch the first episode, you haven't seen it yet, search Grounds for Resistance on YouTube. You'll find it pretty quickly. We've got another 3 episodes coming out over the course of this year, so we're really looking forward to seeing the perspective on that, and we'll be doing some analysis on those episodes in this sort of style moving forward. And to end proceedings, I'm going to share my screen again. I'm going to include the sound, and I'm going to give you the trailer to episode 2.
Across the UK, a programme of small infrastructure projects has divided opinion like almost nothing else. Low traffic neighbourhoods.
They're just trying to close the roads off, restrict parking so they can have more traffic enforcement officers to gain more money for their coffers.
For drivers, they feel like punishment.
They're just ridiculous. They stop all the shortcuts that you would normally be taking.
The traffic going up, not going down.
For others, that's exactly the point.
Pedestrian and cyclists, it's great.
I think they're really good, especially with having kids. It'd be nice if there wasn't cars driving all the residential roads.
The intention was cleaner air, safer streets, less through traffic. But good intentions don't build consent.
I'm all for like parking. I drive every day, but now it's ridiculous around London, isn't it?
I think it's bad because it's hard for us to get our deliveries out. I suppose maybe it needs a lot more thinking about the routes that people take.
Next time on Grounds for Resistance, when a bollard becomes a battle line and the street becomes a courtroom.
Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.